Meet Dr. Lucas Joppa, Senior Managing Director and Chief Sustainability Officer at Haveli Investments. Lucas was the first Chief Environmental Scientist and Chief Environmental Officer at Microsoft, and has been a pioneer in advancing sustainability through technology. He led Microsoft's groundbreaking initiatives to go carbon negative, water positive, and zero waste, and launched the AI for Earth and planetary computer platforms. Lucas is leading the charge in sustainability and the future of technology in addressing global environmental challenges.
So nice to see you here today, Lucas. Thank you so much for joining us on Navigating Abroad. Just got off a really interesting conversation with you around the environmental impacts that AI is having on us. And I would love to hear a little bit about your background and how you started to work in that and where you've developed your point of view.
Sure. So just briefly, I'm an investor, a scientist, and kind of a corporate operator, but all at the intersection of environmental and computer science. And I focus on software and the infrastructure that surrounds it. And the reason I do that is because I'm really interested in how you minimize the negative environmental impacts of what is, quite frankly, kind of the core of our economy today, and how you maximize the positive environmental benefits of building new technology solutions.
So as an investor, how have you honed your investment thesis over time to be focusing in on that specific area?
Well, I started my career at Microsoft, first as a kind of pure blue sky researcher, and then ended my career as the chief environmental officer of the firm. And as part of that, I got to see just kind of all the problems that technology has, but also all of the solutions that are kind of just waiting for investment to come in and help unlock. I helped create one of, at the time, the biggest climate investment funds in the world, $1 billion fund called the Climate Innovation Fund at Microsoft. And so that really got me thinking about and seeing all of the incredible opportunities that we could put money behind to decarbonize the global economy. And then I really wanted to combine my focus on software, my increasing interest in investment, and went to a firm called Haveli Investments. We're a technology-focused private equity firm. And so we invest in enterprise software companies. And I do two things there. I look after the decarbonization of those companies' operations, and I help lead an investment thesis around what I would call sustainability software.
I would love to hear a little bit more about what are some of the trends you're seeing that you think we should be more aware of as we're interacting with all this new world of AI and the impacts it's having on the.
Well, I think first and foremost, the trend that we're seeing globally, and this isn't just about AI, is more and more electricity use. Right? That's a trend that's been going for decades now, and it's just going to continue to go faster and faster. And part of the reason that that's going to go faster is because of AI. We know that this is not just one of the biggest technology breakthroughs in the history of technology, but it's actually one of the greatest accelerants of technology's consumption of electricity, of energy. And so that's a huge trend. But that's countered by a trend in the energy or the electricity generation sector to move towards decarbonization of the grids. And so we see things like solar and wind penetrating the energy markets kind of incredibly. I mean, the projection is that next year, more solar generated electricity will be produced than was produced by coal. And now we need to get kind of coal to zero, but to just have that happen in 1 year is simply fantastic.
That inflection point is something that I think we've all been approaching for many years, and it's exciting to see it come to fruition. For somebody that's not as aware of how AI negatively impacts carbon emissions, can you give an example of what it takes to train an average LLM and what that might entail in terms of the amount of consumption of energy?
Sure. And, you hear all sorts of wild kind of projections about the energy that it took to do this thing. Partly it's because a lot of the biggest LLMs, that are out there aren't super transparent about, what it took to get them there.
Yeah.
So we don't really know, but we do know that it's not trivial. Obviously these are dedicated data centers, many data centers all kind of working together to train these models on over a long amount of time. And so, you hear about projections like, AI is already consuming something like 3.5% that by 2030, AI could be consuming 3.5% of global electricity. Today, projections are maybe somewhere on the order of like a Sweden or a Norway level of total consumption. So it's definitely not trivial. It's kind of coming from three areas. It's coming from the manufacturing of the semiconductors and the chips that are used to do all of this, the energy that goes into that, as well as kind of the some of the chemical processes that go into semiconductor manufacturing. And then it's going into powering these chips, both in the training and in the inference phase. But again, it's super context dependent, depending on the model, depending on the use case. Sometimes the inference phase can be wildly more energy consumptive than the training phase. Sometimes it's reversed. So
vice versa, yeah.
We actually could use a lot more transparency on what is going into training and delivering these things. I think that will change over time. Right now, everything's so hyper proprietary, it's so new, nobody wants to give away anything. But we're starting to see that change. We're starting to see open source models. We're starting to see much smaller models with comparable levels of skill. And so I personally think that overall, the deployment and the consumption of AI is going to continue to go up, but the energy consumption of that per capita energy consumption of AI models is going to continue to fall.
Okay, so you see two trends that are going to have some canceling effect on each other so that we don't overconsume based on our capabilities. In my experience, as a founder myself, I feel like I always learn more from my failures than my successes. And as somebody that's worked in this domain for many years now, I would love to hear your perspective on maybe something that didn't work out the way that you anticipated and what you learned from that we could all apply better to our lives.
I think when we started, the global tech sector, when we started this thing called the cloud, we didn't ever really think that access to electricity was going to be a constraint.
Yeah, it never seemed like a limiting factor back in the 2000s. It seemed like...
No, it seemed forever away. And totally I can understand, right? Because the sector grew so quickly. And so if, imagine some of these early execs, going into their boards at Microsoft or Google or Amazon or whatever and saying, hey, we should really start thinking about, what happens when we run out of energy. I mean, how that conversation would go. They'd be like, all right, let's not, I understand you've got big dreams, but let's maybe deal with that problem when we get there. But now we have that problem. In fact, I think, Sam Altman said at Davos, and he was the first person to say publicly, at least in my opinion, what I think a lot of people are starting to think, which is that he said, we're not going to see the breakthroughs in AI that we know we're capable of if we don't also have significant breakthroughs in energy generation.
Yes.
That's probably why you see individuals, like Sam Altman behind, nuclear fusion startups. It's why you see companies like Microsoft signing nuclear fusion power purchase agreements. Everybody's starting to be aware that without access to electrons, they don't have a product.
So it really is going to be ripe for innovation in multiple sectors coming together from an interdisciplinary point of view to solve some of these bigger challenges and continue to get the benefit.
Totally. I think this is one of the most kind of worrying, consequential times to be alive in human history, quite frankly. But I also think if you're interested in technology and innovation, this has got to be one of the most exciting times to be alive as well. Like, if you're the kind of person that wants the ball, with half a second left on the clock, now is a great time to be alive. Yeah.
So for folks that are energized around this type of work, how can they keep track of the work that you're doing and stay up with the trends? Where can they find you?
Well, anybody can find me on LinkedIn, and I have a very open arms, open door policy to connections. So please find me there and connect.
Thank you so much for sharing your wisdom with us today. We really appreciate it.
Of course, my pleasure.